So I'm going to tell you a bit about Ecumenical Partnership for Housing, talk about the history of the organization, how it got started and grew to where it is today. I plan to tell you about our partnership church model and how that supports the organization, and about our programs. If you have any questions as I'm going along, please feel free to ask as we're going. There'll be a time for questions at the end as well, but happy to have this be interactive. So our organization serves families with children in their household who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness in Brown County. As mentioned in this area, in Brown County there's a significant need for housing. There are some shelters that specifically serve families with kids in the area, and they are consistently full with a waiting list, as is our program. Families that are looking for housing through Ecumenical Partnership for Housing are typically waiting about 6 months to enter our program. Last year, in our area, over 1,400 children experienced homelessness at least once during the academic year. And so that just tells a small piece of the story of why the work that we're doing is needed there. I'll tell you a little bit about our history. The house that's pictured here is the original house that was used to start the organization back in 1992. This house is known as the Jubilee House, and it was owned and still is owned today by one of the partner churches that supports EPH. So this house was owned by a church. They no longer had a use for it, and there was discussion of knocking it down to make more space for parking for the church. There were 2 women within that church who were best friends, and they thought they had a much better idea of what to do with that house than to knock it down, and they got more people on board, brought it forward to their church, and it grew from there. So they ended up having a meeting where they invited other churches to come and hear about this idea that they wanted to use this house to provide housing for one family at a time. And out of that meeting, 4 churches committed to forming a partnership to begin providing housing for families with children that were experiencing homelessness in the Brown County area, one family at a time, utilizing this home. We still use this home today, and it is one of the only houses that is actually owned by a church rather than the organization, but they dedicate that house to our program. Over time, the organization has grown, and today we now are capable of housing up to 41 families at a time, and our church partnership has grown to include 21 area churches of various Christian denominations. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how that growth happened. So the organization was founded in 1992, and it grew slowly from 1992 until 2010. Over that period of time, a new partner church was added a new partner church or 2 was added about every year, and about every other year a new house was added to the program. By 2010, EPH had grown to have the capacity to serve up to 16 families at a time, and it was at that point where the organization had reached a point where they could hire their first executive director, who was brought on part-time. Up until this point, the organization was entirely run by volunteers. So everything that needed to be done was volunteer-driven. By 2012, they had gotten up to 20 transitional homes, and up until 2014, the sole program that was operated was our transitional housing program, which I'm going to talk about a little bit further on. But in 2014, the organization added a second program, which is long-term supportive housing. The difference between the two, in a nutshell, is that transitional housing was for families who are experiencing homelessness, and it was at no cost to them. So rather than being in a shelter, they were in a home, a single-family home or a duplex that nobody would ever know was part of a homelessness program. If they were driving down the street or if the kids had friends over, it seemed just like any other home in the neighborhood. However, the family living in that home was receiving programming designed to support them on their way to become self-sufficient. In 2014, when they added the long-term supportive housing program, that program differed from transitional housing in that it was a rental model. So additional homes were added because what they found was that some families needed a longer period of time, and they needed to be able to build up a positive rental history again, even if they had been in transitional housing that's not a rental. And I'm sure as many of you know, once a family has an eviction on their record, or if they don't have a positive rental history, it's extremely difficult to find anybody willing to rent to them again. So this program rents to families, and they continue to receive case management, they continue to do budget counseling, they're continuing to do all the things that they do in transitional housing, except for it's giving them the opportunity to build up a positive rental history so that when they apply to rent elsewhere, we can verify that they've paid rent on time, they haven't had issues in the home, and it gives them the opportunity to get their foot back in the door somewhere else. By 2018, EPH had recognized the need to work upstream to try to prevent homelessness from happening before families reached our housing. It was a growing need, and so the prevention program was started. That program works with families who are renting from other places in the community who are at risk of losing their housing due to some sort of temporary financial setback, to help them remain in that home and prevent them from experiencing homelessness. Today, as I said, we're up to 41 homes, and that includes 19 homes in our transitional housing program and 22 homes in our long-term supportive housing program. The majority of families that enter our transitional housing program are coming to us directly from one of the family shelters in the area. So they've experienced a crisis, they have entered a shelter, and they've been working with them to do all the stabilization things that they can do. They've reached a point where they're ready to leave the shelter, but there isn't anywhere for them to go because they can't find anybody willing to rent to them, or they may be employed, but they're not making enough to be able to afford the rent. They may be on the waiting list for a housing voucher, which is a significant period of time in Brown County, at least right now. In fact, they're not even pulling anybody off from that list anymore. So it'll be indefinite. So they need to be able to afford the market rent in the area, which is a big jump for anybody who's trying to exit a shelter. So they come into transitional housing, and it gives them an extended period of time to work on those types of things. Yes?
What would be the average amount of time that a family is in a shelter before they move into transitional housing? Is there any kind of average to that?
Yeah, so that amount of time has grown significantly over the past couple years. So prior to joining EPH, I worked at one of the family shelters in Green Bay, and I've been at EPH 4 years. So prior to that, I was at a family shelter, and during that time, just 4 years ago, the average stay was about 3 to 4 months. That has, however, over the past few years, in our area, that has grown significantly, doubled. We're seeing families staying in a shelter for a much longer period of time, and families coming into our transitional program are staying about a year, but some families need to stay longer than that. So we don't have a cutoff based on the calendar, it's just based on their progress in the program and need for continued support.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So the way that EPH was able to be formed and grow into what it is today is, as I mentioned, was that it was formed by 4 churches. This is really the foundation of who we are and how the organization is able to function. So we have, as I mentioned, 21 partner churches. Each of those churches has representation on the EPH Board of Directors. In addition to that, they commit to adopting a home. So our homes are scattered throughout the Green Bay area. It's a single family home or a duplex. We have a fairly small staff for that amount of housing. So we depend heavily on our church partners and our volunteers to help us care for those homes. So each partner church will essentially adopt a home, and so what that means for us is that when a family moves out, we need to get that home prepared for the next family to move in. So there's this, it needs to be cleaned, we touch up the painting, swap out furniture if it needs to be swapped out, anything that would need to be done to get it looking like it is move-in ready. The church will find volunteers from within their congregation to come in and do that. So our staff isn't doing that unless it's some significant maintenance piece that really needs to be a skilled paid staff member. So they will do that. They will also help with lawn care and snow removal. The reason that we have the church commit to helping with that is that the majority of families living within our homes are single parent households, and they could really use some support, especially those with very young kids. If mom is outside shoveling and we have 2 toddlers, who's watching them? Many of the families that come to us do not have a support system. So we may be their only support system. They don't have someone to come over and sit with the kids while they're doing that. In addition to that, the church commits to sharing our mission and ministry within their church to help get people to support us either financially with volunteer hours or by simply spreading the word about us. And then each church commits to participating in annual fundraising. This looks different for each church, but what the majority of the churches do is participate in an annual direct mail campaign. That direct mail campaign, done once a year, supported EPH for many, many years. We have grown to the point now where we need to do additional fundraising outside of that direct mail campaign, but it works really well for us. We get a great response from that. So most of them will do the direct mail campaign, but some do some other form of fundraising within their church. Some have some sort of event at their church where they donate part of the proceeds. Some will do just something else other than mailing out things to their members. So within these churches is where the majority of our direct support comes from. EPH is heavily funded by individual contributions. So most of those are coming from members of our partner churches. We also receive contributions directly from some of the churches themselves. We write grants for private foundations locally, and then we receive about 25% of our operating budget from rental income through our long-term supportive housing program. We do not receive any government funding. We don't pursue that either. And so this partnership church model has really been what has sustained us. Over the past few years, we have increased our focus on community outreach outside of our partnership church while still leaning on this base to try to gain more awareness and support in the community. Any questions on that? Yes?
So, if this is a new house, they have to follow the little tenant rules, so like no activity, things like that. Is that standard part of the?
Yes. So families coming into either of our housing programs, where they're living in one of our houses, they will have a background check. We are looking for things that would be a risk to our staff. So if there's recent violent crime, if there are recent drug charges, can be on the sex offender registry, things that would be a risk to our staff, our volunteers, or the family living in the other side of the duplex.
So do you have a person or managing to make this like that, like something pretty house, or is it an overall person in charge of
We have, so our staff, on our staff we have a director of social services, and she manages our waiting list and the intake process for families entering our program. So for a family who wants to enter either transitional housing or long-term supportive housing, they will have an intake interview with us, at which point we are getting to know the family and letting they have the opportunity to ask questions about us. We want to make sure that it's really a good fit and they fully understand what they're committing to before we move someone in. The last thing that we ever want is for someone to give up their spot in the shelter, move into one of our homes, and then find out it's not what they expected, and now they've lost their space in the shelter, and potentially this isn't a good fit for what they wanted. Yes. You're welcome. Yes. So we are very fortunate in that one of our partner churches owns an office building in downtown Green Bay, and they let us use the entire second floor. We give them a modest donation each year, but we are not paying rent or utilities. So in the other part of that building is a childcare and a food pantry and a room for the church's youth group. So that saves us a significant amount of money every year, and then our annual operating budget for 2026 is about $1.2 million. We have 10 staff, and that consists of 9 full-time staff and 1 part-time staff. Our staff includes myself, a volunteer coordinator, 1 full-time and 1 part-time maintenance person, and then our director of social services and 4 case managers. So essentially everybody on our staff is either working with families, fixing the homes, or volunteers.
And so the volunteer coordinators with churches, the improvements that as a go-to person for that,
She does. So she will be the person to reach out to the churches when we know that a home is opening, let them know what needs to be done. She will reach out to anybody on our volunteer list when we have things that need to be done at homes that are not adopted by a church. Our churches adopt our transitional homes, but our long-term supportive homes are not adopted by churches, and those turn over much less frequent because families can stay there for up to 3 years. So when a family moves out of one of those homes, she'll put out a call to everyone on our volunteer list to get people to come in and help get that home ready. She also does outreach in the community, so she'll go out to schools, to employer groups, volunteer fairs, other places where we can let people know about who we are and what we're doing and try to get them interested in volunteering with us. In our transitional program, the family covers their WPS and we cover the water. And then in our rental program, the family covers their utilities. Yeah. Any other questions at this point? Yes?
In the TLP program, do you still give UAs or do you give UAs at all in breathalyzers?
We do not. So when if we feel that there is concern in that area, that would be a meeting between the family and their case manager. But our program does not include doing drug testing or UAs at all, or breathalyzers, anything like that. Okay. Go into more about our programs. So all 3 of our programs include case management. That is an essential component, we feel, of what we do. We are providing families with a home, but in order for them to be able to make lasting life changes and really be able to have long-term stability, case management is an essential piece of that. So our case management team is working with the families living in our homes on goals related to self-sufficiency. We have some standard goals for anybody in our program, but then we're also working with them on their individual goals. So it's really individualized to each family. Some families tell us that they may have never held a driver's license. They want to learn how to drive. So we have volunteers who work with them on that. Some weren't able to finish high school or did finish high school and want to further their education. We'll work with them on that. It's really, what do they need to work on and want to be working on. A standard piece of our program is that everybody commits to participating in budget counseling. They are required to participate in budget counseling for the length of the time that they're with us, And we feel that's really key to be able to have financial independence by the time they move on. Each family is matched with a case manager at the time that they move in, and that case manager will stay with them through the length of the time that they're with us. So if someone enters our program through transitional housing, and at the end of that time they need to move into one of our long-term homes, that case manager will transition with them. So that person really becomes their main support person through our program and walks with them for their entire journey with us. And they are the person who is encouraging them, motivating them, helping them break down goals, and also the person who holds them accountable to what they agreed upon when they entered our program. So a little more about our transitional housing program. As I said, case management is required in all of our programs. Case management is more intensive in our transitional program than it is in our long-term program. So when a family enters transitional housing, they will be meeting with their case manager at the home every week. And we do this at the home because it gives the case manager the opportunity to take a look inside the house, make sure things look like they're going okay, and then just get a sense of how it feels. They'll meet with that family, talk with them about whatever goals they had set last time, talk about long-term goals, see if anything has come up that a plan may need to be adjusted, and just be there to support the family. We do require that anybody in our transitional housing program maintains employment, so all adults are expected to be working unless there is some reason why they are unable to work. An example of this may be if it is a single-parent household and they are on a waiting list for childcare, and they have kids of the age that they need to be in childcare for that person to be able to go to work. If they don't have another source, then they would likely be on W-2 to have some form of income until they're able to be employed. Budget counseling is required. We partner with Catholic Charities in Green Bay for this. They provide budget counseling for all of our families, and we supplement it in between those visits through our case management. Everyone, if they have debt, is working on debt reduction. We ask families to prioritize any debt owed to past landlords so that is taken care of by the time they attempt to rent again. Everyone is working on building up savings, and then, as I mentioned, whatever their personal goals may be. In order to qualify for transitional housing, a family needs to have a referral completed by somebody they're working with. So typically, families entering this program are coming to us from one of the family shelters. Probably about 90% or more are coming through that route. And so their case manager at the shelter will complete a referral. And what this is basically giving us some information about the family, telling us what they've worked on so far, where they still need support, and kind of why they feel that this would be a good program for them. They also will then sign a consent for a background check and release some information for us to speak with the case manager at the shelter if we have further questions. Then when their name is up on our waiting list, we will pull them in for an intake interview. They'll come in and they'll meet with our director of social services and the case manager, and they'll get to know each other. Ask any questions that may have come up from looking at the referral or their background check, fully explain the program to them, make sure they feel that this is a good fit for them and their family, and then if both parties feel it's a good fit, from there they would schedule a date for the family to move in. Most families are staying in transitional housing for about a year. They do not pay rent during that time, but they are expected to be using the majority of their income to pay down their debt and put money into savings. Each family will have a budget that they've agreed upon, and then we follow up on that as their case manager meets with them. And like I said, they do pay their own WPS, but we cover the water. Any questions on transitional housing? Yes?
This image of the first house that you started with, I guess I'm just curious about more details about how that came to be. Was there a need of a family for housing, and then the church got behind that, and then you came on board with it? and the antecedent to the question is, right now, we're sitting in a location where we've got multiple churches and empty vacant houses on those church properties.
Yes.
That are being absolutely underutilized. And I understand the vetting process is very serious and you gotta do that carefully. But I guess underneath it all is, how do we motivate churches and church leadership teams to utilize their properties in a way like you've done here?
Well, I think sharing what we're doing is a great way to motivate churches to do that. Two of the churches that we currently use are owned by our partner churches, and they partnered with us to put families into them because they no longer had a use for them. And it's been incredibly successful for the Green Bay area. And when we get churches on board, they're really bought into that. And a lot of times when we're meeting with churches to see if they would like to partner with us or not, I've found that it's typically they are either really on board almost right away, or they really feel like this is not something that they want to pursue. And but I would say that we have found that bringing churches together to work towards this common mission is really a great way to get many people to support it, because once their church is on board, then you have the attention of everybody who belongs to that church. And if the church leadership is on board, the people within the church are more likely to be on board if the leader of the church is promoting it and is part of that mission. So the way that it started with this house was that people who were members of the church that this house belonged to recognized the need for housing in the area. So there was a need that was not being met specifically for families with kids. And that was something that spoke to them, and they really wanted to do something about it. And so they spoke with some other people within their church and brought it to the leadership, invited many churches to come together for a meeting. And then out of that meeting, they got 3 additional churches to commit besides their church. Over time, we've been able to grow that to 21. And the churches that own the 2 houses that we use that are not owned by EPH are incredibly supportive. All of our churches are, but the 2 that own those are able to see that house, can kind of see, what's happening there. And this house, the original house, is still being used today. And so they really strongly stand behind that, because that was something that people from within their church wanted to be involved in. Yes?
Follow-up question. In your experience, and without being judgmental, what have been some of the obstacles churches saying, yes, I want to join EPH?
Sure. So some of the obstacles are that, sometimes churches don't want to commit if they feel that they may not be in a strong place financially, and sometimes there's the concern that if they're asking their church members to financially support an organization that they've partnered with, they may not have the support that they need coming in financially to support their church. They also may feel that they don't have the volunteers needed to be able to care for a home, or to have someone commit to being on a board. Those are some of the common concerns that come up if churches aren't sure. You're welcome.
But a church has a parsonage, it's not being used, can you take it over without owning it? That they continue owning it, and you can help them, that they don't have, it's not burdened to them.
Yep.
Is that like a done that at all, or whatever it is? That they don't actually need to participate on a board or volunteer doing the house and things like that. The goal is to get them involved.
Our goal has been to get them involved, so to this point, we have not used a home that's owned by a church without the church being involved. We only two, like I said, only 2 of the homes are owned by churches, and the rest are all owned directly by EPH. And we've purchased those as we've raised funds to be able to buy them outright. So we don't take out any loans. We fundraise, and then we'll add an additional property when we can. But we haven't had the situation where we've had a church that wanted to let us use the house but didn't want to be involved in the organization. Yeah, that has not happened directly from a church either. We were fortunate a couple years ago that, yeah, yeah, that would be yeah, that would be, that would be an amazing situation if someone wanted to donate a house to us. We were fortunate a few years ago that a member of one of our churches had a home that he no longer needed and decided to donate it to the organization, so we were able to increase our capacity that way. And it was actually someone who didn't know about our organization, but went and spoke to their pastor and said, I really want to do something great with this house. No longer need this big of a home for just myself. And the pastor told him about our organization and he ended up donating it. Yes?
After leaving your programs, how successful are families at staying permanently housed?
Yes. Our organization last year, when families moved out of our housing program, about 70% successfully moved into their own stable housing. The long-term rate on like 5 years out, or how long they stay in their own home then, isn't something that I have. But I can, for our prevention program, we're able to follow up, which I'll talk a little bit more about prevention further on, but essentially once we issue financial assistance for them to stay in their own home that they have been renting versus losing that and potentially needing to enter a shelter, when we follow up with those families 6 months later, about 80% of them have still avoided eviction. One thing that I didn't mention is that when EPH started, up until about 2020, 2021, EPH was not the organization doing the case management. They partnered with another organization in the community who did the case management. So EPH owned all of the homes and did the upkeep and had all the volunteers taking care of that, but another organization did the case management, and so those types of like longer term outcomes and things, when the case management was brought in-house, that information was not information that EPH had, so that stayed with the other organization. And they decided to make a change during the pandemic due to very different policies regarding being able to enter a home or not for staff, and the desire for that all to be under one roof and still being able to meet with families face to face during that time. It has ended up working well. It was a significant period of growth for EPH because that added quite a bit of staff to the organization. But that is something that we're working on, being able to measure, trying to be able to measure as best we can further down the road, because it's not always the easiest to get a hold of people to really follow up once they've been out of our program for any length of time.
How long is that?
So it's almost impossible to essentially track people because they have to be, in our prevention program, we can say that they have avoided eviction because we are reaching out to try to connect with them. We look on CCAP to see if they have anything on their record, and then we are also, just last year, we started participating in a shared homeless management information system that the community uses, that you can see if someone has access to homelessness services or not.
So you're building a case study that shows that this organization is the
Yeah. Yes.
You mentioned before that you don't get government funding,
Mm-hmm.
but how is corporate funding for you? I mean, does the corporations in the Brown County area support what you're doing?
So that is something that we've started working on. Last year, we formed an additional advisory committee, and that committee is made up of people from various businesses primarily in the Brown County area. But prior to that time, almost all of the support was coming from the churches and people within those churches. However, because we've grown so much, we have started trying to reach out to other sources of support and make people aware that we're there. For a long time, EPH was not very well known in the Green Bay area outside of the churches that supported it. So we are trying to be more involved with businesses, and that is one of our goals, to have more support from the larger corporations in the area. But right now we're not. We do get some support, but it's not a primary source of support for EPH. Yes?
A follow-up on that is, so not getting state federal funding, is there a specific reason that you have decided to go down that path?
So EPH had made a decision to try to avoid taking that route long before I joined, and primarily due to the amount of staff time that would be needed to manage those grants and make sure that the reporting and auditing was, yes. So if we were to pursue that, we would likely need another staff person.
The grant writer, reporter,
Yeah, and we have been successful in fundraising so far without it. And so if we are able to continue to do that without the strings attached to that type of funding and the amount of staff time that would be needed to management, we would like to continue to do that.
and so they can bring funding all.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
I think we said this already, so the uniqueness of your program is you never like buy a house unless it's a church is going to adopt it, right? It has to be a church that's going to be part of that house.
Well, we will, no, so we will still purchase a house, even if there isn't a house or a church ready to adopt it. We would just try to get other volunteers to help with that. But right now, we have 19 transitional homes and 21 partner churches. So we have more churches than we have transitional homes for them to adopt at this point. But a couple of our smaller churches are partnering together. So that's an option for them too. But yes, did you have a second part of your question?
You know, I mean, that's your goal, is to have a church to try to adopt, right?
It is our goal that all of our transitional homes would be adopted by a church. And we ask that each church has someone who is willing to step up into a role that we call the unit coordinator. And essentially that person is the volunteer coordinator within their church. So that is the main contact person that our volunteer coordinator will reach out to when we know that that home is opening. And then that person will gather people from within their church to come together, work on the house, get it decorated, get it stocked, all of those things. Yeah, you're welcome. Yes?
We've been talking about Brown County. Let's talk about Sheboygan County. Do you have plans to enter into the market here and raise something up, or are you trying to stir the crowd for somebody to step up and do something similar? It seems it would be better not to reinvent the wheel, to take all that you've done and just kind of come into a different area and reproduce it. What do you speak to that?
Sure. So I was ready to speak here because I believe the goal is to get the community motivated to potentially launch something like this, or to use the idea to help support housing in the area. Our organization does not have any plans or goals to expand outside of Brown County. There's such a significant need in Brown County that we, even with the amount of housing that we have, people are still waiting a significant amount of time, and so it just doesn't make sense for us to expand outside of where we currently are. We're connected with all of the resources, have our community partners, but we are happy to share information with other communities who are considering launching something similar. About 2 years ago, I did basically this same thing in Door County. with a group there that was interested in forming a housing partnership based off from this model. And we met with them a couple times. We shared our handbook and policies and answered any questions that they had over time. And they did successfully launch, and they have, I believe, one home or duplex that they started with, and some churches that got on board, and a social services organization to do the case management. And so they use this model to start in Door County, and I believe their goal is to continue to grow that as well. So we're happy to share information. If there are people here who are interested in doing this sort of thing in your community, as you go along, definitely feel free to reach out. We're happy to support people trying to do the same type of work, but we do not intend to step outside of our current area.
One follow-up question then. What would you say are the three primary things that Sheboygan County area would need to do in order to ramp something like this up, like Lakeland County did, for example?
So having the property would obviously be a primary piece. Have somewhere to house people. Have people who are willing to volunteer their time to support the organization, and have people who are willing to support it financially.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll move on to our long-term program. This program is, like I said, our rental model, and families can stay in this program for up to about 3 years. That gives them time to build up a positive rental history, time to really be stable and used to paying that rent each month. They're paying their own utilities, so it gives them a long enough period of time to be able to move on and not feel that type of shock that they might feel if they're stepping right out of a shelter or right out of transitional where they're not paying rent. These homes are almost all single-family homes that we're renting out to families, and it's the same guidelines as our transitional housing program. They have to have at least one minor child in the home. They still have to participate in case management and budget counseling while they remain in that home. The case management is scaled back a bit, so by the time they've reached this point, the idea is that they're a bit more stable than they were when they entered transitional housing, and so case management might be every other week, and if they're at a point where they are almost ready to leave, or they're just need to maintain what they're doing, and they'll be fine, then it'll drop down to once a month, but that's the minimum. At a minimum, families meet with a case manager at least once a month for however long they're with us. A piece of this program that I'm really proud of is that we give families the option to purchase that house at the end of the time in their program. If their goal is to become a homeowner, we will sell that home directly to them. We'll only sell the home to the family living there, and then we will use those funds to purchase another house. The, of course, huge benefit for the family is that they don't have to compete in the housing market, and they don't have to move their family again. For many families, this may be the longest period of time that they've lived in a single house with their kids for their life. And they've become part of the neighborhood, gotten to like that house, and the family pictured here is a family who purchased one of the houses from us a few years ago. Of course, this is not even close to being the majority. Most of the people move on to rent, but we have had several families purchase the house from us during the past 4 years that I've been at EPH. In order to do that, they do need to get to a point where they are able to secure their own loan. We do not function as a lender. So overall, through both of our housing programs last year, we served 62 families, and that included 156 children in those homes. On any given night, we have about 100 kids sleeping in EPH homes. Our prevention program is the newest program at EPH. Like I said, that started in 2018. It really took a pause during the pandemic because there was an eviction moratorium. There was a lot of funding available in the community to help people avoid eviction. So this program really scaled back during that time. However, over the past couple years, the demand has increased significantly. Families who are at risk of losing their housing due to inability to pay their rent temporarily can reach out to us. We'll have them come in and meet with us. We'll talk to them about what's going on. If there is a reasonable path forward, that if they got past this period of time, that they would again be able to afford that home, then we will step in and fill that gap. So many times, this is a family who has been living somewhere and they've been doing fine. They don't have it's not a family that likely has a significant amount of savings, but they've been getting by. Some emergency comes up, someone has to be off from work unexpectedly. It was a 2-parent home and it is unexpectedly now a single-parent home and they weren't expecting that. It can cause a disruption in their financial situation. So they might not be able to afford to pay the rent for a month or 2 months. And they will come to us, we'll set up a plan with them, and we will then issue financial assistance directly to the landlord to cover the rent, and do case management with the family as far as setting them up with a plan to be able to get back on track to affording the home on their own. The landlord needs to be willing to talk with us, verify that the family is not at risk of eviction for any reason other than non-payment, and that if it's paid, that they don't intend to pursue eviction. Last year was the first year that we served more families through this program than lived in our homes. So last year we helped 66 families, and that included 138 children avoid eviction through this program. That is the number of families that we issued financial assistance for. We received many, many more calls than that. We are not able to provide assistance through this program if there isn't a reasonable way forward. So if it appears that eviction is really inevitable, they're not going to be able to afford a home, it's not something that they're going to be able to maintain, then we will not issue financial assistance. This is my contact information. I also have cards back there. Like I said, you're more than welcome to reach out to me if you're considering getting something like this launched in your community. I'm happy to answer questions. Are there any other questions that we didn't touch on? Yes?
Do you partner with the school district at all to help identify families?
We do. So we have a good relationship with the McKinney mental social worker in the Green Bay Public Schools, and she is also someone who refers families over to us for our housing program. She's a great partner, and when if something comes up with the family, we can talk with her sometimes to help navigate through that together. If there's concern with school attendance or additional support needed for the family. So yes, we do work with the schools. Yes?
The idea of helping a family with rental expenses and buying houses, maintaining those houses, sounds like a huge cash outlay to me. How do you manage from embryonic stage to helping to having where you are today, that you don't step out on your skis and start to stumble? Because I can see it'd be very easy. There's such a huge need, but this is a big cash requirement, and that's coming from people who are pulling money out of their pocket, as a choice that they're making.
Sure.
How do you get past that, or how do you manage that, I guess?
Yep. So EPH has been doing this for over 30 years. So in the beginning, obviously I wasn't here when it started, but I have talked with the people who were. So in the beginning, they had one house that was already existing, and a church was willing to donate it for this cause to be used for that. So they didn't need to be able to raise the funds to purchase the house. So that would be the ideal situation. If there's a property that has the ability to be used for this, that's how EPH was able to get started. And initially, there were no paid staff. Everything was volunteers, at least on the EPH side. It took some time to get it to the point of where there were enough church partners, enough people behind it, and enough awareness in the community to really be able to add the amount of housing that we have now. There were a couple capital campaigns that committee got together and set a goal of raising enough money to purchase X number of houses. Now we assess our financial situation as we go along throughout the year, and if we are at a point where we have enough funds to purchase an additional house, then we'll evaluate if we have enough staff to support another family and another house, and cover the additional expense that will come with insurance and potential maintenance expenses before we make that purchase. Yes. We do have an endowment. So we have a general endowment, and we have a case management specific endowment. So when EPH made the decision to employ case managers directly, they decided to add an endowment for case management. But the general endowment, we take distributions from that just to use for general operating expenses, and so for a while it was going into a different area, but a few years ago we started taking the distributions just for general operating.
Because how many families does your case managers? You have 4 case managers, so are you looking to eventually have another, maybe have 10 families that are doing?
So the 3 of the case managers are dedicated to our transitional housing and long-term supportive housing program, and then 1 is dedicated to our prevention program. So the 41 families are split up amongst the 3 case managers, and we try to make sure that they have a mix of transitional housing and long-term supportive housing, because we know that when a family initially moves in, they're going to need much more of that case manager's time than... if they're in transitional housing, they're meeting with them once a week. If they're in long-term housing, they are meeting with them at least once a month. Some meet twice a month. Yes?
Yeah, I'm wondering if you work with specific employers to help people find and then especially retain employment?
So when families enter our program, most of them are employed because that is a requirement of our transitional housing program. If they lose that employment, their case manager will help them search for a new position, but we don't have any sort of arrangement with a specific employer that they would give preference to families in our homes or anything like that. Yes?
Talk about that, right? So a lot of your families already have employment. Does EPH charge them a monthly rental amount while they're in transitional housing? And then does that amount change now when they're in long-term housing? Or does EPH cover those expenses?
When they are in transitional housing, we do not charge them any rent. We expect them to pay their WPS bill, but that would be the only expense related to housing coming directly from the family. And the reason for that is that we really want that first period of time where they're in transitional housing for them to be intensely focused on paying off their debt and building up a savings. So rather than us collecting rent from them, they are set up on a budget that a significant amount of their income is going towards paying off any debt that they have and building savings.
But in long-term housing, there is a...
Yes. Yes, so in long-term housing, everyone in long-term housing is paying rent, and so recently we've had a change in this due to the change in availability of housing vouchers in the community. So prior to pretty recently, within the past year, EPH could essentially depend on that whatever the rent was set for that long-term home, as long as there was a family living there, that amount of rent was going to come in. Now but that was when there was people were able to have housing vouchers. And now things have shifted a bit in that people are not being pulled off the waiting list. So some families entering our program do not have a voucher. We know that if people are paying more than 30% of their income for rent, that they're going to have constraints in other areas. We will not have anybody living in one of our homes who were collecting more than 30% of their income. So if they qualify for the program and we're moving them in, if the full rent amount is more than 30% of their income, we drop that rent down to whatever 30% is. We also, we have some families who are able to pay the full rent, and then we have some families who already have had a voucher, and then that supplements the rent to EPH. Yes?
And I'm not as familiar with some of the crises that rebate has versus destroyed, but we have a lack of mental health resources here. And obviously a lot of those people are experiencing how do you help them manage and get that help that they need, or really participating in that?
So we're connecting them with community resources. We don't have any sort of in-house counseling, but their case manager is really working closely with any family in the home to make sure that they are connected with mental health services if that's something that they need. So getting them connected with a counselor or with a medical provider if needed.
Next question is, out of the people that are in the long-term housing, how often do you have a rough percentage of the evictions that you're looking at?
Of how many people we asked to move out of there. Since I've been with EPH, we have never taken a family to court, and we would, that would be our last resort to ever, regardless of what was going on, we wouldn't want to file an eviction to further hinder them down the road. If a family is not participating in the program anymore, they're done with case, they don't want to do case management anymore, or not working and whatever it is, if they're not abiding by the program guidelines, then they would be having conversations with their case manager and trying to correct that. But if it doesn't get corrected, then we would issue a non-renewal. And at that point, any family that we've issued that to has just voluntarily left. So we've never had to file eviction, but total for our housing programs, about 70% are successfully leaving to stable housing, and the other 30% are either we had to ask them to leave or they chose to leave on their own. Included within that is that if a family is in our program and they decide that they're going to go stay with their sister or somebody else, but it's actually not a lease in their name, we do not count that as a successful transition to stable housing. Yeah. Yes?
So, as you reflect on how this was started and grown, do you have any, could you comment, perhaps is what I would ask it, on, we wish we would have known, looking back and what are some of those, yeah, back then we wish we would have known, but these are things that you really should be aware of if you are planning to do something.
So like I said, I've only been with EPH for 4 years. Prior to that, I was working in one of the shelters. The person who was the executive director for about 10 years was still on the board when I joined, and I have a good relationship with him. And I would say, from just the history that I've heard and things, I think that they did make the shift to have the case management all aligned under one roof back during the pandemic, when the pandemic was going on. And so I think potentially, you know, I can't speak to what they might say, those who were around back then, but that could potentially be something. And something that we have seen even in just over the past few years is really the need for intensive support of the family living in the home. So even just during the time that I've been here, we have shifted the case management and the long-term supportive housing program to be a bit more supportive than what was originally thought when the program started. Just to make sure that there's not a huge drop-off. When you're going from meeting with someone once a week to once a month, kind of a lot can happen in that period of time. And the case managers, I would say, are a lot more hands-on from the time that we initially took case management in-house. And really, like, they will do things like go with the family to a food pantry, help them apply for various resources, sit next to them to make sure that they have the WPS bill paid, and that, you know, doing really, it's truly walking alongside, and that is the type of intensive support that is needed for many families entering this program. I would also say life skills is something that can sometimes be overlooked, and oftentimes a family that's in our program may have never had stable housing before this. They grew up experiencing homelessness with their family or had very unstable housing and were really just in survival mode. And so they may not have learned the skills necessary to care for a whole house that we're putting them in. They may need someone to work with them on organizing a home, coming up with a schedule for cleaning. Driving a car is not always something that people think about that someone may not have the ability to do when they're an adult with children. But for some people that never happened, and so we feel, you know, if that's a goal for someone, we want to help them reach that. So having people available to help with all sorts of situations where that support will help the family become independent. Yes?
So, for this to be successful, and for families to be successful, they have to be agreeable to sort of like the financial and the budget concept that you guys offer. So
Yes.
then that means they have to be willing and open to sharing the truth of their finances. Do you ever find that that's sort of a sticking point where they don't really, I mean, they want, you know, they may want guidance, but they may not want to be open with, you know, what their finances are, or open to the suggestions that you guys might have for them in order to be successful. I know I probably wouldn't want somebody peering into what my financial situation is. Did you find that to be a sticking point ever, or is that totally?
Sure. So I will say, you know, there have been a couple times, but not too many, where someone has come in for the intake interview, and then once they hear all of the components, might say, okay, this isn't exactly what I thought it would be. I more thought I was going to be able to move into a home, and I didn't exactly expect someone to be coming to meet with me every week and to be sharing all of my financial situation. And they may say, no thanks, I'm gonna keep looking. That has happened a couple times, but literally only probably less than a handful of times since I've been working here. By the majority of the families that are coming to us are recognizing that they're at a point where this is one of the few resources available to them, and so they're really, I've found, very interested in doing whatever they can to be able to move their family back into a home. Once families are with us for a while, sometimes we do find that they may start to feel like, you know, I've been doing this and sharing this with you and following and talking about this budget for 6 months. I'm really starting to kind of not be as enthusiastic about this anymore, but their case manager will continue to try to motivate them and hold them accountable to that this is part of the program, so it's really not an option. And it's not like we're going to ask someone to leave immediately if they don't want to share with us this week, but we'll try to get things back on track. And nobody's ever going to be, or not often going to be perfect to their budget all the time. And things will come up where maybe they decided to spend something that maybe we would have preferred it went somewhere else. But for the most part, people are, they're working with us on developing that budget, so they've bought into it. And they know that's what has to happen in order to be able to be successful in the program.
That's awesome to hear.
Following that, perhaps that's one of the advantages of not taking governmental funds, is that it's their money, they can run the park the way they want to, and the participants can choose not to participate if they don't want to. Because there's no government topic, it's not taxpayer dollars. So that makes it easier to say, well, you provide by the rules, they don't.
Yes.
I guess as a follow-up to the question, so is it ever to the point like, you know, this is prior to pay off, like, debt to pass anymore, right? Is it might come in where the case runners say, you know, did you really pay it, I don't want to see proof, or do they just take the word that it's
No, we see proof. So they will develop a written budget with them, and then we will see pay stubs or bank account, however we're going about verifying financial information, and then we will want to know that, you know, if we agreed that out of this paycheck, X amount of dollars was going here, we will verify that happened. It's not that we don't believe what they say, but we just want to make sure that we're all on the same page with that. Yeah. Yes.
How do you handle people, applicants with a history of drug or alcohol use?
Well, it's on a case-by-case basis, so it depends on what the situation is and if they've gone through treatment, how long ago that treatment was, and you know, what their supports are in that area. So our program is not designed for people who are actively in the active phases of addiction. If they are in recovery, that does not bar them from being in our program. But we are not a place for people to detox, and we don't have the type of intensive support to help people who are trying to work through that. But we have worked with some people who are referred to us from the Brown County Treatment Court. We have worked with some people who have been referred to us from a couple of the sober living homes in the area. And truly we're looking at that pretty closely on a case-by-case basis. How long have they been drug or alcohol free? What has that journey looked like for them? And what is the plan for support in that area if they were to enter into one of our homes, knowing that we do not have an AODA counselor or someone with that specific expertise on our staff. So we would want to have a plan set up for them before they came in, and if they did enter our program and then there was some sort of relapse, we know exactly what the plan is for that. So it wouldn't necessarily either be an immediate exit from our program if they were living in our house and they said to their case manager, you know, I had an issue and I really want to get back on track, and they would work with them through that. But if that is not something that the family is willing to or able to work on at that point, then we wouldn't be the right place for them. So we're really leaning heavily on community partners for that. Yes?
Thanks for being here. Pete, you said there's no government funding. Is there any role that state or local government can play?
Not for our organization. We don't. I would say the only, you know, if you, like I said, we accept housing voucher money. That's if the family is holding it, and then we have the voucher. So it has been funneled through in that way, but we aren't receiving any grant dollars from any sort of government, and for various reasons. One, like I had mentioned, the amount of time necessary to maintain those type of grants is pretty significant, and also we really, like this gentleman had said earlier, want to be able to maintain the integrity of the program. So sometimes if you are receiving government dollars, there are some guidelines attached with that of who you need to take in what order into your program, and what things you can or cannot ask someone to leave for. And that's not something that we are interested in pursuing at this time.